Did the New York Mets do enough at the trade deadline? We're going to talk about that on today's breaking trade deadline special edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. That's also where I spent the last 2 hours on a live stream as everything trickled in for the deadline. There was never a move that was big enough that I hopped out of that live stream and into this one. As the Mets made moves around the edges, they get a starting pitcher, Paul Blackburn. They get a couple of relief pitchers, Tyler Zuber and Huascar Brazaban. Not the big move. They didn't get Tanner Scott. They didn't go out and get Blake Snell, Garrett Crochet, even Zach Littell, who I talked about the last couple of days as a Rays starting pitcher with another year of control as a possibility. No, they were very careful at this deadline. They didn't make the huge moves, but you go around and you look at what other teams traded to get impact pieces. I think the Mets did well at this deadline because they didn't give up the franchise-altering haul for a moderate return. Of the trades that are out there, who was the big piece that landed somewhere that's a difference maker that require the prospects that got sent back? Great example of this, Trevor Rogers. The New York Mets were in on acquiring the Marlins starting pitcher. Well, you look at what the Orioles gave up to get him. Connor Norby has been a top 100 prospect, a guy that's putting up unbelievable numbers in AAA. Kyle Stowers, a guy that has been pretty decent this year in a very limited sample size with the Orioles, and in AAA has continuously hit home runs over the last few years. An outfielder that is going to slide right into the Marlins starting lineup, as will Connor Norby. What do the Mets have to have gotten Rhett Rogers? They don't have a package that they could have put together that would have been worth it. Yeah, maybe you trade Acuna, but do you really want to trade all of your control on Luis Angel Acuna for a pitcher in Trevor Rogers who's got a 4.5 ERA? So instead, the big move of the day, if you can call it a big move, is getting Paul Blackburn. Now, Paul Blackburn is not going to move the needle much. I don't even know how much better Paul Blackburn is than Tyler McGill or Adrian Hauser. I mean, this is a fifth starter, back-end guy. But here's the thing. I'm going to trust this front office, and I'm recording this now 2 minutes from this moment. David Stearns is going to go live, talk to the media. I'll catch up on it after my own live stream here and see what he has to say about it. But I trust the process that has got the Mets into this position. And that's why I'm okay with what happened at this deadline, because essentially the Mets have gotten more arms to mix and match and to shuffle through. And if one of Brazaban or Zuber clicks, or if Blackburn clicks, it's a good enough deadline. And not to mention getting Stanek in the fold too. If you zoom out, they got Phil Maton, Ryan Stanek, Zuber, Brazaban. That's 4 arms to shuffle into your bullpen. We'll talk about those pieces a bit in the next segment, but that's a lot of options. And hopefully if one of them hits in a big way, well, maybe that solves some of your issues. And then when it comes to the rotation, I think this was the Mets not overreacting to the Kodai Senga news. Now, they could have tried to get Jack Flaherty. They could have tried to put a package together for Snell or Crochet, but nobody got Snell or Crochet because the cost was probably too much for any team to really consider going all in for them. So when you think about the starting pitchers that did go and the packages it took to get them, I think the Mets did a pretty good job here to not give up the farm for this season, where honestly, getting Trevor Rogers, how much closer does that get you to a playoff spot than Paul Blackburn? I don't know if it's a significant difference. So I like what the Mets did just based on a crazy market. Now, to get into what they actually receive here with Blackburn, this is a guy that has been a decent starting pitcher in Oakland the last couple of years. Has had an ERA sub 4.5 the last 2 seasons. So you're looking at an ERA between 4 and 4.5. That's not great, but for a fifth starter, that's not bad for a guy that has made 20 starts in each of those seasons. He's under control for this year and next year. So he does give you some rotation depth. He's had a very interesting season because he got off to a great start, did not allow a run in his first 2 starts. Then he gave up 3 or more runs in 4 of his final 5 starts before hitting the IL with a stress reaction in his foot that has basically kept him out pretty much all season. Just came back off the IL, a guy with the 6-pitch mix. Maybe the Mets believe that they can get a little bit more out of him, but I think this is a guy that they're going to be comfortable slotting into that 5th spot of their rotation. Someone who is better than McGill. I know I said he's close, but he's better. He's got more big league experience and better results in his big league experience than McGill has had. And to get him, you give up Cade Morris. Now, I like Cade Morris as a prospect, which is why I can't say, oh, this was a no-brainer. I think it hurts a little bit to go Cade Morris. This is a guy who has been pitching in high A, has done well across his season, split between low A and high A. He has a 3.51 ERA in 16 starts, 18 games pitched. 3rd-round pick just last year. I thought he was a pretty good prospect, but if the biggest haul that the Mets have given up at this deadline to get a lot of pitching into the organization is trading Tyler Stewart, who was maybe their 7th best pitching prospect, and now Cade Morris, who's maybe fringe top 10 pitching prospect that they have, but definitely not in the Mets, even potentially top 20 prospects. Well, Cade Morris is a nice arm, but he's not something that you lose too much sleep over, especially knowing that you just had a draft, adding more talent into the organization. You still have another international period coming up in the offseason to replace that type of an arm. So I think the Mets ultimately traded prospects they were comfortable dealing, and they were able to get pitching in. Was it enough? That's going to be the big question because, again, there is not a big move that the Mets made that you can really sell to the fan base. I would say the best thing that they possibly did as far as that goes, as far as bringing excitement, is getting Jesse Winker. I put a poll out on Twitter yesterday. Is Jesse Winker going to be the biggest move the Mets made at this deadline? I think that proved to be the case. Jesse Winker does give you a guy that's going to be in the lineup most days, batting behind Pete Alonso right in the middle there. We've already seen him with some pretty good at-bats. I think that was probably the best thing that they did. But what you have to do if you're going to accept this deadline and call it a win for the Mets, and I think if anything, it's more of a push. It's like they passed the test, but maybe it was a pass-fail class, and they did not fail the deadline, and they passed it. They didn't ace it. But I think what you have to look at is the fact that a lot of teams that bought to get some pieces for their mix gave up a ton. The Mets did not do that. And without a difference maker in sight, Snell did not go, Crochet did not go. I think they did what they had to do to help this team, and they did not see that all-in move that made it worth it to push the chips forward and maybe sell a top flight prospect for this season. I think they believe they have enough. So I want to talk about the bullpen guys because I do maybe like the bullpen additions a little bit more than Blackburn. So we'll get to that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online with their easy-to-use website, which is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining Supply House's free Trade Master program, where every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/T-M and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime some news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime, and you get the starting lineup sent to your phone each day in a text, so you don't have to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk about the relievers the Mets added. They make a trade for Tyler Zuber of the Tampa Bay Rays, giving up Paul Gervais in the deal. Gervais is a minor league reliever, pretty good one, but you're trading a minor league reliever. That's never something that you're going to be too worried about. And you get a guy in Zuber that could help you this year. Now, Zuber was pitching in the Atlantic League this season for the Long Island Ducks, apparently rediscovered his joy for baseball, ends up signing with the Rays, where he pitched to a 2.49 ERA in AAA across 21 and 2/3 innings pitched, strikeout per 9 over 12. Fastball sits at 95, got a sweeper and a cutter, and he has an option. So the Mets don't have to have him on the active roster. I think that was an interesting way to go about this. Essentially, the Mets made a couple more of the moves that we've seen them make throughout the season, where they pick up a Matt Gage, where they pick up an Alex Wood, where they pick up these guys Alex Wood. They pick up these guys off of waivers or guys that are in a roster crunch that can come in and be part of your bullpen mix, and you cycle through guys and you hope one of them hits. So Zuber is one of those guys. We'll see if he ends up being a nice piece for the Mets, but I think it's important to note those options because you have Sean Reed-Foley, who is on a rehab assignment. He does not have an option. So when he's healthy, he's going to slot right back into your bullpen. Eventually, you're going to get Reed Garrett back. You're also going to get Daniel Nunez back. I think those guys end up being your bigger acquisitions for that bullpen, whereas Zuber, Brazoban, these are guys that can fill a void for now. And if you end up at a point where your bullpen's good enough where you don't need them, you can option them down and retain them beyond this season. That's particularly important with Brazoban, who might just be a good addition. I think that's probably sneakily the best move of this deadline for the Mets outside of Winker, but just looking at all the pitching acquisitions, I really like the Brazoban addition. He comes from the Marlins. Okay, to get him, they traded Wilfredo Lara, which I guess Peter Bendix loves him. But considering the return that the Marlins were getting on all their other pieces, it feels like the Mets got a steal here with Brazoban, who has a 2.93 ERA this season, and he's striking out basically 10 batters per 9. Only 1 year of service time, so you have him controlled for 4 more years if he ends up, sticking with you. Batters are hitting 100 against his cutter this year. That's it, just 100. That cutter, really good pitch, his primary offering that he works off of. He has a changeup that he throws a lot too, that has a whiff rate over 40%. And then he's got a sinker and a fastball that sit at 96. I think this was a very sneaky addition for the Mets, not to mention he has pitched some multi-inning appearances. So he might be another guy where you can sort of, pair him with Jose Butto, where, all right, Butto just pitched. Now you got Brazoban ready to go, and you can stagger those guys to have your multi-inning relievers. I think he could be a really nice fit for this Mets bullpen, and you love the return. You didn't give up much. A utility man in the minor leagues who's probably got some upside. That's why the Marlins decided to jump on it. But a 692 OPS, again, in high A this year, didn't really trade much. So the Mets end up getting 4 relievers at this deadline. If you go back to Phil Maton and then Ryan Stanek and now Zuber and Brazoban, I think they did fairly well. They did not get the Carlos Estevez. Kyle Finnegan didn't get traded. Tanner Scott. They didn't get that lockdown reliever, but they got a lot more options to cycle, and you just have to trust David Stearns, this front office, the pitching lab, everything else, that they're going to be able to piecemeal this bullpen and make it hold up for the rest of the way. I can't look at this deadline and say, wow, the Mets just crushed it. I can't do that because, look, you want to be able to have that big piece that you look at and say, yeah, that was the crowning move of this deadline. The Mets got whatever it is. For the Dodgers right now, they get Jack Flaherty at the 11th hour. Huge move for them. The Orioles did a bunch of different things, but those teams have a more clear World Series window. They got a shot this year. You look at the position the Mets are in, and I think they did a really good job of sort of straddling that fence because the Padres were very aggressive. They traded a ton to make a super bullpen. Tanner Scott, Jason Adam, what's the other pitcher for the Marlins? Brian Hoeing. They get a lot of guys to build out a really good bullpen. And these two teams are neck and neck right now in the wild card race. But do the Mets have a better lineup than the Padres, the way that we've seen it play out the last 2 months? I think so. And the Padres are, kind of chasing their tail, trying to make sure that they do everything they can to stay in this race. But just because they have a great bullpen doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the team that ends up there at the end. Look at the Cardinals. They get Eric Fetty and Tommy Pham. Good trade, absolutely. But I don't know if I look at the Cardinals and say, oh, they're significantly better than the Mets. But they traded Tommy Edman. I think the Cardinals did a very good job, kind of similar to the Mets, where they didn't really cost their future, but they got better. I'm trying to think of the other teams that are in this race. The Diamondbacks made some moves, but they weren't uber aggressive. I think those 4 teams are ultimately going to be competing for 2 spots. The Giants did some weird stuff. They trade Soler. They trade Alex Cobb. They don't trade Snell. they're caught in the middle, but I think not in the way that you'd like. Whereas the Mets have a much clearer path to the playoffs, but they did not hurt their future. And I'm okay with that. Okay. I'm good with the Mets playing this deadline smart when you think about what other teams did and how much it cost. Yes, the Mets starting rotation did not get the big lift that we were hoping for. We were dreaming of whether it was Snell, Flaherty, Crochet, Fetty, Littell, Cal Quantrill. There's a lot of names that I talked about on the show lately, but they got to this point this season without having Kodai Senga. It's not like they lost Luis Severino, who's been doing it for them every fifth day. They got to this point with the team that is pretty much still here, and you did add some pieces. So I'm okay with it the more that I look at everything, but it's sort of a meh. It's a meh. It's not a great deadline. It's not a bad deadline. The Mets made some moves. I don't think any individual move was bad. And I don't think any individual move was great. I think the best one, and it's funny because I didn't like it at the time, was Jesse Winker. I mean, Jesse Winker is the one impact player that the Mets have here. And I actually just see, wow, who made the comment, don't love the name, but Mets September schedule is beyond brutal. It's not a bad point because they have to play the Phillies a ton, the Braves a ton, the Brewers are their last series. So the Mets got to stack wins in August, and I think there was a world where you went more all in for this team, and it didn't work out for you, or it doesn't end up working out, where the Phillies knock you around in September, and then you're kicking yourself because you traded Luis Angel Acuna for Jack Flaherty, and now Jack Flaherty is a free agent. You can't extend him a qualifying offer, and Acuna is gone to the wind. So I think considering that, you are in a very good place. And I believe the Mets still have what it takes to make this final playoff push. That's what I want to talk about next here in the final segment. We're going to zoom out now and look at the state of the roster. Where are they at? Do they have enough? Are they going to make the playoffs? We'll talk about it all in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You watch the winnings roll in. Get on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week. From lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or get your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Do me a favor, if you're watching the live stream, you can fire any questions you have away in the comments. I will try to get to them before we close the show. But let's look here at what the Mets have right now after the deadline. What is the state of their roster? So the rotation, you have Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana, David Peterson, and Paul Blackburn. Now, again, Blackburn is not the incredible pickup that you were looking for, but how much different is Paul Blackburn than Zach Littell, than Trevor Rogers, than Cal Quantrill, some of these names that we were talking about? I don't think it's that significantly different. And when you see a lot of these starting pitchers that were out there getting 2-3 prospects to only give up a Cade Morris, I think that was still a pretty solid deal. And Blackburn can absolutely be a 5-and-dive starter for you, maybe a little bit better throughout the final couple months of the season, and just be that stopgap that you need until you get Christian Scott back, until you get Kodai Senga back, but that would probably be in the playoffs, already on the 60-day IL, so you're not going to see him for the rest of this regular season. But I think ultimately the best possible piece for the playoffs is going to be Senga or Scott if either of them gets healthy. And there was not that addition that was on the table at this deadline that would help your playoff rotation to that degree in October. So they made a smart, measured move. Now, when it comes to the bullpen, well, huge addition by lack of subtraction, Jose Butto stays there. And Jose Butto has been so good in that bullpen. I think that's really good for this team. Right now, your bullpen is Edwin Diaz, Jose Butto, Phil Maton, Ryan Stanek. I think those are the 4 leverage guys you would say, with Adam Ottavino still in the mix. And I don't know who the final 3 arms are going to be as they get through this shuffle. I'm sure Brazoban will be there. I'm not sure if Zuber is going to slot right into the bullpen or end up in Syracuse. That's going to be an interesting decision. They have Alex Young, Danny Young, and Matt Gage there right now. Alex Young has been very good as a left-handed reliever. I think he's going to stick for this season. So I'd slide him into that mix of most likely to stay in that bullpen. And then again, you still have the opportunity to get Sean Reed-Foley back, to get Reed Garrett back, to get Daniel Nunez back. And if you plug those 3 guys in with Butto behind Diaz, okay, well, now we're cooking. Maton, Stanek, that could be really good. Ottavino, whoever's not performing, might end up getting DFA'd at some point. But the Mets have a lot of different options here, and they have shown an ability to have a bullpen that's horrible for stretches, but then they tinker, and they figure it out. Bullpen's been pitching a lot better lately, and I think this just adds more reinforcements into the coffer, not to mention just a sort of under-the-radar thing that happened today. Shintaro Fujinami did not get claimed on waivers and was outrighted to Syracuse. So now he's not on your 40. You can still work on his control, see what happens. That's another guy that has a little bit of upside with his high-octane stuff that could end up in this bullpen. I've talked about Brandon Sproat a lot. If you desperately needed an arm, you can call up your top pitching prospect. He might be a fit. So I think this team is in a very good position because they have a lot of different options, okay? Now, did they get the huge move? No, but I think they checked off a lot of different boxes here. And ultimately, I come away from this deadline saying, all right, the Mets didn't mortgage their future. I think that's a good thing. They didn't give up a prospect that I'm going to be losing sleep over or worried about what they're going to become. And, there's a chance that Brazoban and Stanek could be really great additions in that bullpen, and they cost significantly less than what other teams traded to get the guys that are having the unbelievable seasons. You look at what the Padres gave up to get that lights out bullpen, it cost a ton. So I feel like this was a good enough deadline to round out the roster. That's what the goal was. That's what they accomplished. And now it's just, all right, roll out that lineup with Jesse Winker in the mix. That's the other thing. You look at the starting lineup right now, and it's pretty damn good, okay? Between having Winker, Nimmo, Bader, McNeil, those guys going in and out in the outfield with Tyrone Taylor, that's a really good outfield at the moment, and Starling Marte could come in and make it even better. You look at the infield, Mark Vientos continues to be great. You look at Francisco Lindor at shortstop, McNeil and Iglesias at second, Alonso hopefully gets hot, JD Martinez at DH. Hopefully Francisco Alvarez is going to be okay. He's day-to-day right now with a little bit of an injury, but you have Alvarez and Torrens as your catchers. On the bench, at some point, you could still add a Brett Beatty into the fold if you want to lift. You could add Luis Angel Acuna if you want some speed and defense. I think the Mets have everything they need to make a run. So you got to remember, this team has been the best in baseball for the last 2 months. And that's what they have going for them compared to the other teams in this wildcard race. And again, going back to what we talked about in the last segment, I don't see any of those teams in the wildcard race that did so much that I'm scared that, that team just made the big swing that's going to make them too dangerous and they're going to catch the Mets. The Padres did the most, and it was just making a great bullpen. That's not always going to be enough to say, all right, they're 100% going to be a playoff team. So now you play the games, and that's the fun part. I'm excited to cover each and every one of them. Mets play tonight, continue their series against the Twins. On tomorrow's show, I'll be recapping that, and I will be also discussing everything that we hear from David Stearns, who's already been talking for 20 minutes now. So I have that to catch up on after I close on this and get the podcast up. I appreciate all of you who tuned into this live stream. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, of course. trying to get to 10,000 subs. So I appreciate all of you with that subscribe button. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with your local experts from each team and your league-wide experts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.